I've been married to my husband Troy for 8 years now. We met during a work function and hit it off. We got married 4 years later, and at first everything was great. We were both working and had our own homes, and we decided to hold off on kids until we were both further along in our careers. Neither of us wanted to give up our work to become full-time parents, and maternity leave is too short and paternity leave is non-existent. At the time, I work in medical sales, and my husband managed a restaurant and did some coding on the side. We amassed a good amount of savings in the first 3 years, things were going great, and we were making plans for our future. Then the pandemic struck. Things started to slow down a lot, to be honest with you. And, well, it was because the husband's management at the restaurant and the lockdown restrictions. They were always sit-down only, and the owner refused to pivot to offering takeout, curbside delivery, or putting the restaurant on apps like Uber Eats to keep it afloat. They thought the COVID thing would just fizzle out, and they would be back to business as usual. Of course, that did not happen. About 6 months after the lockdown, the restaurant was shut down. My husband was out of a job, and that made me the primary breadwinner, at least until he could find something else. The virus was still crazy at the time, so jobs were far and few between. He managed to pick up some freelance coding jobs, but even those were becoming more and more sparse. I suggested that maybe he'd take a few coding courses to fill the gaps in his knowledge, and then maybe he'd be able to find a bit more work. I told him he could dip into our joint savings if need be. I just did not want to be taking care of the bills and food all by myself. He agreed, and he signed up for a bunch of free and paid ones, and he also bought a bunch of computer equipment that he claimed was necessary. At the time, I believed him. I would go out to work and leave him on the computer, then come home and meet him on the computer, and I thought he was just working diligently. I told our family group that he was looking for work and taking coding classes, and our family would send listings that they found both for freelance work and in the restaurant industry. I'd send them all to him, and he'd say he was, quote, looking into it. I'd ask him how his courses were going, and he'd always be very short with me, and I thought it was just because he was busy or stressed. I remember buying him a bunch of books and stuff to annotate if need be. He said they were useless because all the information he needed was online, so I returned them, because the last thing we needed was to be wasting money. And he gets mad at me. He said if it was a gift, I should not have taken it back. Well, I argued that we barely had any savings of money since I had to take care of all the bills. And until he started bringing money into the household, we need to be more careful about our spending. He went into his home office and slammed the door. He stayed in there for almost all night. Things only got worse between us from there. A year passed since he first started taking courses, and things were opening back up post-pandemic. And there were jobs available. I just kept asking him if he was having any luck finding work. And he kept telling me that he still did not know enough, so he had to take a few more courses. It's fine by me, but I started to get stressed out. I was taking all sorts of extra work to keep us afloat, and I begged and pleaded with him to please find some work because I could not keep doing this all by myself. And, well, he did. What he'd do is find some quick and dirty work just to bring a little money in, enough to shut me up for a while so he could go back to being a lazy husband. This went on for months, and we'd go in circles around and around, fighting about money with him getting a little money to placate me, and it would start all over again, a vicious cycle. At one point, I told him if he did not want to work, he should take care of the house and cook. Well, he agreed, but would never do it. The laundry and dishes would pile up, and I'd end up spending my weekends tackling them. I decided I'd tell him once to get on top of the chores, and of course he did not listen. So I resorted to a bit of a drastic measure. I would only cook for myself and do my own laundry. I would hide my own separate set of dishes I've kept clean. Eventually, when he noticed that I was not doing these things for him anymore, he gets mad. But little did he know, I recorded the conversation where he said that he'd take care of the housework. So once he was done yelling, I just played it for him, playing it extra loud to make sure that he heard. He stormed out of the room, but I did not stop there. I stopped buying groceries for him, and I would buy those meal boxes that have just enough for one person to make a meal and eat it. Of course, it took him a while to notice because he just gorges himself on snacks all day. One night, when I was sitting in the kitchen having dinner and watching videos on my phone, he came in and asked if I've made any for him, and I simply said no. Well, he gets mad and calls me selfish. I told him my dad always says a man who doesn't cook doesn't eat, and since he cannot even be bothered to pull his weight with the housework, well, I had no other option. I could not keep being the breadwinner and the maid. He had to do something. And the excuses rolled in. Oh, I'm still doing courses. Oh, I'm trying to find more work. But the offerings are sparse, and he said I needed to be more patient with him. I said I've been patient for 2 years. My patience has run out, and I needed to see some results, or I was leaving to find my own place. He begged me to not go and said that he'd do the best to find work. I only shrugged and went back to eating. He was still talking to me, but I completely turned him out. I just think that this was the moment, and well, I don't know, he realized I was truly done with his nonsense. The next day, he told me that he'd secured an interview at a local restaurant. Apparently, one of his buddies he used to work with helped him get a meeting with the owner. It was amazing news. For the first time in a long time, I felt relieved. We were finally going to be a 2-income household again. He'd already gotten his suit dry cleaned, so he was ready to go. I dropped him off the next day, and I was nervous the whole time at work that day. I messaged him on my lunch break to ask how the, interview went, and all he said was that the owner said that they'd get back to him in a few days. And a few days later, he found out that he got the job. I was over the moon. They needed him to start right away, and I made sure all of his old work clothes were clean and pressed. Some of them had to be adjusted a bit because, he put on some pandemic weight. The restaurant opened from midday to 10, so our schedule would be in conflict. So outside of the weekends, we would not see each other as much since I worked 9 to 5. For that first month, it felt like we were in the blissful early years of our marriage again. I was happy not to have to deal with all the bills alone. However, it was painfully short-lived, and about 5 weeks after my husband got the job, he got fired. His excuse was that the owner wanted him to balance too many responsibilities at once, and since he was not able to keep up, she let him go. While I was really upset about it, I did not want to beat him up too much about it, because he did go out and try. This one just did not work out, and I told him I'd ask around at work and work events. There are a lot of well-connected people involved in medical sales. I was sure that we'd find something new for him in no time. When I got to work the next day, I made a ton of phone calls and asked for a bunch of favors. By the end of the day, I had at least 10 places Troy could send his resume. The only one was promising was a ghost kitchen. It needed an inventory manager. The hours were good, and so was the pay. The owner was willing to hire him right on the spot if he passed the interview. When I got home, a little earlier than usual, I met Troy on his computer with a headset playing video games and shouting at people into his microphone, which was something I was not used to. Usually, when I got home, he'd be tapping away at his keyboard, saying that he was working on a bit of coding. He was startled when I walked into the office and said he was not expecting me yet. I handed him a list of email addresses to send his resume to, and told him to include his cover letter in the body and tell them that I sent it to him. He kind of nodded absently and went back to what he was doing. I asked him why he was playing video games, and he just said it was no big deal, just something he does from time to time to let off a bit of steam when his courses get a bit too stressful. Also, he was looking into coding for video game companies, so most of it was technical research. I said, whatever, just make sure to send your resumes to the place I've asked. A few weeks went by, and I asked him what happened with the applications. I knew that he'd gone at least 2 interviews, including the one to the ghost kitchen, and he told me that he did a few interviews, but none of them have called him back. But he said there was something else he needed to talk to me about. So we sat in the office together, and he said his sister Sophie is pregnant, and I immediately rolled my eyes. His sister and her husband already have 2 kids that they can barely take care of. They're constantly asking Troy's parents for money so they can make the ends meet. Sophie's husband works at a job that pays barely minimum wage, and he also volunteers at the church 5 nights a week and almost all day on the weekends, and does not get a dime for it. Yes, they're militantly religious too, so they don't believe in birth control or getting rid of the baby, or at least that's what the church has taught them into believing. She constantly stressed out because he does not help at all with the kids or the housework. She's 28 but looks 50 because she barely gets any sleep or time to herself. She has no friends outside of the church, and it's basically a cult, but she just pretends to be happy because it's, quote, what God would want. They tried many times to get me and Troy to join the church. I've only gone once, and I got a really bad vibe from the people there. The members, they just seemed aghast. I don't know. That I had a job that made a lot of money. More money than Troy, of course, and some even accused me of emasculating him. I told them if Troy felt emasculated, he was free to leave. They all gave me a disgusting look because divorce is a deadly sin for them. I don't talk to Troy's sister or brother-in-law much, not even at the family events. I cannot even if I wanted to, because she's always just wrangling her kids, and he's always trying to stay as far away from them as possible. I'm convinced that he doesn't even like his own family. Troy told me that Sophie was having this 3rd child in a few months, but was strapped for cash and could not afford some of the necessities, diaper, formula, etc. And her husband was not making enough money at the junkyard to cover their household bills. So, if they don't get any intervention soon, their utilities would be cut off. Troy's father had retired the previous year, so he and Troy's mother were surviving on a pension. I want to feel sorry for them, but they've made that very difficult. When his sister and her husband had their 1st child, they were already stretched thin. His parents told them to consider birth control, but they were so wrapped up in their dogma that they didn't listen. By the time that they had their 2nd kid, they were completely dependent on Troy's dad to help them with their bills, and now they've had a 3rd coming with 0 support. A lot of Troy's other siblings did not even talk to them because they've had some regressive views on social issues. But anyways, I digress. I told Troy I did not have any extra money to give them. After taking care of the bills, I barely had anything left at the end of the month. He just argued that it was just $400, so it should not be such a big deal, and that other family members were chipping in, so it would look bad if he did not give any. I told him he should find some money to give them because I was not giving any of mine. He gets really upset and calls me selfish, saying if any of my family was in need, he would go help without question. Well, I told him he did not even have enough money to help himself, and he gets really red and storms out of the house, which I'm glad he did because I needed to do some digging. I wasn't buying his no callback excuse thing, because a lot of people I spoke to said he would be almost guaranteed a spot with his level of experience. So I sat down and decided to make some calls. The guy who owns the kitchen, said Troy showed up late to the interview and did not at all seem interested in the job. The consensus was the same for everyone else. He seemed like he really didn't want the job, and downplayed his competence a lot. I was absolutely furious. I dropped the job on his lap and he squandered it. I'm definitely going to confront him about this because this could very well be the last straw for me. But I want to do a lot more digging first. I need some more facts. Update number 1. So I met with one of my closest friend and colleagues, Kevin, to have a bit of a venting session. We've been working in medical sales for years together, and I trust him in his advice. Also, he has a girlfriend who codes, so she should be able to provide me with valuable insight. I met with Kevin for lunch, and we got to talking, and I told him about my frustrations with Troy. It was like he was refusing to work and spent all day on his computer doing coding courses, apparently. He kind of cringed and said that there's no way Troy was actually working or doing courses all day. Cody taking time, but if he's done as many courses as he said he's done, he would have been getting steady freelance work by now. He said his girlfriend was getting steady work even after 1 year's worth of courses. His theory was that Troy was either addicted to video games or something else, and that I should check our expenses and definitely check his computer. Luckily, Troy was still mad at me, so he was out of the house and I went to his computer and shifted through his emails, and what I found there was so infuriating. Dozens of job offers that he's turned down. Some of them were paying almost 2 times what he made at his old job. Kevin's girlfriend told me to look for any coding programs. I saw Python on his computer and I looked through his files because, she said, if he was coding as much as he said he was, he should either have a good number of projects or a few really massive ones. Anyways, I sent her screenshots of the files and she said that he was totally bullcrapping me. Also, all that fancy computer equipment he bought was so unnecessary. He could code on a regular laptop if need be. It's not that serious. I decided to find out exactly what he spent our money on, yes, our money, because it came from our joint savings, so I checked his Amazon purchase history. He'd bought an expensive gaming monitor and a bunch of computer parts, including a really expensive keyboard. I sent the names to Kevin and asked what they were, and he said that they were for gaming, and told me to check if Troy had Steam on his computer. He did. He also had a lot of games. Kevin taught me how to check how much he's played on the games, and some of them had 1,000 hours of playtime. This was what he was doing all day instead of looking for a job. Taking coding courses and trying to make some real money. This is what he was doing all day while I was busting my butt for hours, trying to keep us out of debt. After seeing all that, I thanked Kevin and his girlfriend for their help and went to lie down. It took everything in me not to grab a hammer and smash that computer. I still want to do a bit more digging, but at this point I'm strongly considering divorce. This is not the man I've married, and I can't live like this anymore. If I'm going to be providing of my own, I may as well be on my own. Update number 2. I did not think it could get worse, but somehow, it did. And well, after finding out that Troy has been lying to me this whole time about what he's been doing during the day while I'm at work, I decided to check our expenses. That included going back into his Amazon account to see his purchase history, and on top of all the computer stuff, he's bought a bunch of controllers, most of which I found hidden away in the office, some cosmetic stuff, and more mice and keyboards. So much unnecessary, expensive nonsense. I took note of everything and then headed out to the bank to check our joint savings because I was 100% sure that was where he was getting all the money for his stuff. I was right. 3/4 of our joint savings were gone, and I asked the bank for a report on everything. The money was spent on, and on top of the computer stuff, he's been ordering almost every day from Uber Eats. I mean, thousands of dollars on food over the last 2 years. They were also a bunch of in-game purchases from various things that he's been playing. Now, divorce is imminent. But before I pull the trigger on that, I wanted to go over to his parents' house and have a chit-chat. Basically, they were some of the few people who were constantly helping Troy to find work when he got fired. Also, I haven't really seen them in a long time, mostly because they live an hour away. Troy's mom was immune-compromised, so they didn't really want visitors. They were still happy to see me, though, and invited me in for a bit of coffee and pastries. They asked me what brought me here, and I explained everything. At one point, I broke down crying and needed a few minutes to settle down before I could keep talking. I told them about how Troy has been sitting around the house playing video games all day and draining our savings while I'm stressed out at work trying to make sure all our bills are covered. They were shocked to hear this. Troy's dad explained to me that Troy had told me that he'd found steady work over a year ago. Like, every time they called or texted him, he would talk about how busy things were with work, and that's also why they stopped sending job listings. They had no idea things were this bad between us. His mother told me that When Troy's sister called needing money, she told her to call Troy since their dad was retired and could not help. If Troy was so busy, he should be able to spare something to help her. Troy told them the last time they talked that he'd promised to help his sister out. Well, I told them about the conversation we had where he tried to hound me for $400, got upset, and left when I did not do it. His dad was livid. He told me I should sell all the stuff that he's bought. Well, I was very tempted. His mother was not too happy about the prospect of divorce, but understood my frustrations and said that she would not blame me if I left. I wanted to try something, though. I had all of the power since here I was the sole provider in the relationship. And I wanted to watch him squirm a little bit for all the hell that he's put me through. Update number 3. So it's been about a month since I've executed my plan, and it seems to have worked. Troy is back to work. Yes, that's fast. His dad helped out a lot with this plan, so huge thanks to him. Here's what I did. I bought a whole bunch of deadlocks, padlocks, and deadbolts, like a bunch, and I locked up our home office so he could not go in there. I also hid the keys in a safe he could not get into, and I made printouts of all the purchases that he's made and all the emails where he explicitly turned down the jobs. I also signed him up for a guaranteed job working for one of his father's friends. He'd start the very next day, or we're going to get a divorce. Simple as that. The house is in my name and he has no savings. His parents also said they would not take him in, so he'd have nowhere else to go unless he planned to drive across the country to visit his siblings. When he got home, I was in the kitchen cleaning up. He asked if I had calmed down and was ready to talk like a civil adult. I said yes. He said his sister needed the money urgently, so if I could send it ASAP, that would be great. He said he was willing to eat ramen for the whole month if it meant that he could help her, and that I would not need to buy any food for him. I didn't say anything, I just passed him in the folder of evidence I've compiled and told him not to say anything until he read through every page carefully. I sat there and ate my tea while he was reading, and I could see him getting visibly more and more panicked. He said, "I can explain." I said, "Don't bother," then got up from the table, went to the other room, and came back with a uniform. I told him he was starting a new job tomorrow, or I'd be serving a different kind of paper, and they were already being written up. He had a year to turn things around, or he would have to find somewhere else to live. I wasn't talking anymore. I didn't want to hear excuses, or I'd kick him out right then and there. If he wanted to help his sister, he was going to make the money he needed to help her, because I was not doing it. I let him know the joint account was off limits until it got to the amount it was at 2 years ago. Troy's dad, also wanted to talk to him, so I got him on the phone. I could hear him chewing Troy out through the receiver. I don't know what he said to him, but Troy seemed to humble himself pretty quickly. He started apologizing profusely for giving me a hard time and leaving me to do all the work. He said that he'd do better. I said I wasn't accepting his apology until I saw better, and I went to bed. Every morning since then, he's been up bright and early, in uniform, going to work with his dad. He said he'd been secretly keeping tabs on him through his friend, and things seem to be going pretty well. As of this month, Troy will be taking over some of the bills so we can start saving again. I'll hold off on saying I'm happy, but I'm pleased with the way things are going so far. Yeah, that story was crazy. There were a lot of red flags. I mean, you don't code on your computer for 12 hours a day and get nothing out of it. No job, no money, no degree, literally nothing. It was obvious that Troy was lying. He was playing video games all day. I mean, I enjoy video games too, but when they take over 12 hours a day of your time, you know that you probably have an addiction or a problem, and you just need to find a way to fix that. Guys, I want to hear from you, though. At the end of the story, we find out Troy was basically forced to get a job, but I want to know, do you think he's truly going to change and OP's marriage with Troy is going to work out? I want to hear your thoughts about that, so drop it down below in the comment section. My name's Mr. Reddito. Thank you for joining me today. I'll see you in the next one. And remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.